community. One of the gifts of our faith tradition is that in addition to our principles and purposes and being a non-creedal faith, we also draw from many sources for our spiritual and religious growth. And one of those sources is the wisdom found in the world's religious traditions. For the past few months now, I think a number of us have been talking about honoring Vesak, which is an important Buddhist tradition. And so I want to thank Jeanne and Shriyani and Donna and Bob and Susan and so many people who have helped gather wisdom to share among us this morning. One of the very special things about this community that I've come to love this year is that one of the deep wells within this congregation is created every week on Tuesday evening and Saturday mornings with the two meditation groups that meet weekly. So I definitely want to thank the people I've mentioned who are leaders of those two groups and all the participants, because those groups create space for personal spiritual growth. So Vesak is the most important Buddhist holiday. It's celebrated at the time of the full moon, usually in May, but the full moon date shifts, as we know. This holiday honors the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and passing out of the cycle of rebirth. So I invite us this morning to gather, to be at peace in our minds, bodies, and spirits. And let us this morning break the cycle of our ordinary lives so that we might clarify who we are and who we hope to be. This jar reminds us of the often confusion and hysteria and muddle we feel in our lives. Sometimes our minds feel very muddy. So today, let's just relax into the service so that as we sing and chant and share a ritual and words of wisdom together, we might find clarity for ourselves. One of the other things that often is very important in varied spiritual traditions is the practice to feel that we have our feet on holy ground. And while I believe that with every step in our lives we are walking on holy ground, there's also the practice in many traditions of taking off of our shoes off to feel our feet on the floor and honor it as sacred space. So if you feel comfortable, feel free to take your shoes off and feel that sacred groundedness in this space. So as we gather, I would like to also highlight a couple of announcements. Next week is going to be an important and special service. It's Memorial Day weekend, and Ed Garby will be leading the service, and it's on war and how compassion can be found even in the midst of war. And we want to honor in our midst those who have served in the military, and also to remember loved ones who may have died in military service. We also want to remember that our benevolence for this month is for the Safe Harbor domestic violence program. So a portion of your change that you, or monetary gifts that you give, will go to Safe Harbor. So let us enter into this sacred time as we hear the words of Thich Nhat Hanh.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me all right? It's such a joy to be here, and we thank you for allowing our little Buddhist community to share our path with you. When Reverend Terry arrived here almost a year ago, hard to believe, she was immediately very receptive to our Buddhist community that was meeting weekly, and discussions started up pretty quickly about how we might be able to honor the Buddhist tradition in this fellowship, in the life of this fellowship, along with all the other spiritual traditions that we honor here. So the idea came up that we would have a Buddhist service, and we decided that the first full moon, the Sunday nearest the full moon in May, would be the natural time to do it. This is a wonderful, beautiful spring morning, and the rain actually stopped for us, so we're here to celebrate this Buddhist holiday, as Terry mentioned, called Vesak, V-E-S-A-K, and it's also sometimes pronounced Wesak with a W sound at the beginning. In Buddhist countries, the full moon in May is the most sacred day of the entire year, and it's especially so in Theravada Buddhism, which is the Buddhism of Southeast Asia, and it's also the tradition that I have studied and practiced in. Other traditions in Buddhism, such as Vajrayana and Zen, will celebrate this occasion on slightly different days, and it's usually due to the different lunar calendars that they follow. But Vesak is celebrated all across Southeast Asia, in Thailand, in Laos, Vietnam, Burma, Cambodia, which is my daughter's birth country, and Sri Lanka, which is Shriyani's homeland. And it's a very holy day that honors, as Terry said, the founder of Buddhism, who was an Indian prince named Siddhartha Gautama, and it commemorates 3 signal events in his life: his birth, his achievement of enlightenment or nirvana, and what is called Mahapariনিbbana, which is passing into ultimate nibbana. It's something like a state of mental purification that involves getting off, as Terry said, getting off of the cycle of death and rebirth. So according to the Buddhist texts, all 3 of these significant events in the Buddha's life happened on the full moon in the lunar month of Vaisakha, or Vesak, which generally corresponds to our Western calendar month of May. Sometimes it's April, late April, but it's usually sometime in May. Now, if you read the biographies of the Buddha, and there are many of them, you'll find a variety of ways in which these 3 events are described. Some of the biographers of the Buddha are very flowery, very rapturous. The story will include all kinds of miracles, things like babies being born out of the side of the mother, babies walking immediately after they're born, very magical elements. And the Buddha almost takes on a godlike quality in those stories. Now, other biographers will stick to a storyline that is really more believable maybe, and more in line with the cultural and historical time of the Buddha in India. So to talk about these 3 events, what I'd like to do is read you some passages from a couple of biographies of the Buddha that I took off of my bookshelf. And first we'll hear about the Buddha's birth. And this, as you'll quickly see, is one of those very flowery biographers. 25 centuries ago, there flourished in India a city called Kapilavastu. It lay about 100 miles north of the modern city of Benares at the very border of Nepal, where the fertile fields of the Ganges Valley begin to rise into hills and purple mountains. And beyond that, the land soars to the eternal snows of the Himalayas, where the gods live and the sacred rivers have their source. The city and the little kingdom that lay around it for about 900 square miles were dominated by a people of the Sakya clan. They were Hindus, descendants of the Aryans, those poetic conquerors who moved into northern India about 3000 BC, speaking the mother of languages, Sanskrit, and compiling the oldest books in the world, the Vedas. The Sakyas had a king whom legend tells us was called Suddhodana Gautama, the family name Gautama. Suddhodana was deeply in love with his wife, Queen Maya, a lady so beautiful that those who saw her could hardly believe their eyes. Her name was Maya, which means illusion, and they said that it fitted her, for she looked like a girl in a dream. Moreover, she possessed the highest and choicest gifts of intelligence and piety. We're told that she abhorred murder, stealing, lying, immodest behavior, and strong drinks. And then there's a long narrative about the story of how Queen Maya conceived Prince Siddhartha. This may sound a little familiar. It's an immaculate conception. She had a dream in which she was transported to the heavenly realms by angels. And when she arrived there, she was visited by a white elephant, which came thundering down from a mountain, holding a lotus flower in its trunk. And the lion smote her on her side 3 times, and voila, she was pregnant. So in the months that followed, I'll continue with the reading, Maya lived in happiness, vital and unwearied, protected from every ill by watchful, invisible gods. And when she thought the time had come when she was about to give birth, she reminded Suddhodana, the king, that it was the custom of the women of her family to have their babies under the parental roof. Suddhodana gave his wife permission to travel to her native city, Devadaha, some miles away. He sent out an army of servants to smooth down the road along which she would pass. Maya set out in a palanquin with a company of servants and ladies in waiting. And when they had traveled for about 24 miles to the very edge of her native land, the queen saw a lovely wooded forest known as the Lumbini Grove, full of giant trees and shrubs. It was springtime, and the legend says that from the roots to the tips of the branches, the grove was one mass of flowers, and from the midst of that mass came the hum of bees and bird songs and the cries of peacocks. The queen commanded her caravan to stop and rest while she strolled for a while in this grove. She moved from thicket to thicket and from tree to tree among the flowers, and then at the foot of a giant satinwood tree, she reached up her hand to touch a low branch, which seemed to bend down as if to greet her. And just as she grasped the branch, she felt the first pang of birth. She cried out to her women servants, who speedily came, bringing with them silken canopies, which they hung on the tree branches like a curtain around Maya. The queen delivered her child then and there, standing up, with the blossoms falling down upon her and never removing her hand from the branch of the satinwood tree. The baby was a beautiful boy, not raw and wrinkled like ordinary babies, but the color of creamy gold, not squalling, but emitting sweetly modulated and charming sounds, similar to the bird songs in the grove. So, after that very auspicious birth, Prince Siddhartha grew up in luxury in his father's palace, but even when he was a baby, the soothsayers, to his father's dismay, were predicting that he would not become heir to the throne, that he would instead become a great spiritual leader. And when Siddhartha grew into a young man, that prophecy actually came true. He became so disturbed about human suffering that he saw in the kingdom that he renounced his claim to the throne, age 29. And he left the palace, and he became a spiritual renunciate, living in the forest, denying himself food and comfort, and practicing all kinds of self-mortifications, which was very common actually at that time among spiritual seekers in India. Now, after 6 years of those practices, he still felt that he had not found the answers that he was looking for. And one day he accepted a bowl of rice milk that a village girl came and brought to him. At that point, he was very, very thin, emaciated, really on the point of starvation. But he accepted this offering. And he had a realization at that point that neither the extremes of luxury that he was brought up in, or on the other hand, denying himself and practicing self-mortification, neither one of those extremes would lead to purification, spiritual purification, and neither one of those extremes would lead him to the answers that he wanted. So he formulated the idea of the middle way, in between the two extremes, and he realized at that point that he was very close to enlightenment. So let me read you another biographer's description of the enlightenment. What is enlightenment? The time had indeed come for Gautama to achieve what he had been seeking for so many years, and the events of that day, as described in the texts, are imbued not only with symbolic meaning, but with peculiar calm and dignity. Taking the offering, the rice milk, he went to the nearby river, Naranjara, and putting the bowl on the bank, he entered the river and bathed himself. Then he returned to the bank, and he sat down with the bowl in his lap, and he began his last meal as an aspirant to Buddhahood. After the meal, he washed his hands and the bowl, and he placed the bowl on the water in the river to float. And he said, "If today I am to attain full enlightenment, may this golden bowl float upstream." The bowl immediately did so. So Gautama spent the rest of the day relaxing along the riverbank. And in the evening, he got up and he made his way to the Bodhi tree, the Ficus religiosa, a tree sacred in India, known now as the Tree of Enlightenment. He had chosen this as the place for his great act of meditation. On the way, he met the grass cutter Sotia, who gave him some bundles of kusa grass. This grass was regarded as sacred and was used by the Brahmin priests for sitting on. Gautama spread this grass at the foot of the Bodhi tree. He turned to face the east, and he sat down in a meditative posture. Thus began the great trance from which he was to emerge on the full moon day of the month of Vesak as a fully enlightened one, a Buddha. The course of his meditation that night is elaborately recounted in the ancient texts. At an early stage, he was confronted with worldly temptations in the form of demons, an episode markedly similar to the temptations of Jesus in the wilderness. Then he moved through various stages of spiritual ecstasy, calling to mind all his previous lives and existences, and he pondered how things come into being and then disappear. With his mind purified, he then considered the nature of defilement, how it is caused, and how it can be destroyed. In so doing, he shed from his mind the various forms of defilement, sensual desire, the wish for continued existence, delusion, and finally he achieved the deliverance that he had sought for so long. "Now the cycle of rebirth is ended for me," he said. According to one account, Gautama spent 7 days in this trance, emerging as the sun was rising and the full moon of Vesak was setting. And then he spent further periods of time in the vicinity of the Bodhi tree, gazing at it with gratitude for having sheltered him and walking up and down in front of it. Now, after attaining enlightenment or nibbana, the Buddha spent the next 45 years, I'm going to fast forward through his life. He spent 45 years teaching what he had learned, and he traveled all over India by foot with his disciples, the Sangha, or community of monks. And when he reached the age of 80, he told the monks that within 3 months he would leave this life. He foretold his own death. And when it actually happened, it was fairly mundane. It was actually a case of food poisoning. And I'll read you about that. The third of the signal events of Vesak, the Buddha's passing. The next morning he rose, robed himself, and taking his bowl, went with his brethren, the monks, to Chunda's house. Rice and cakes were prepared, and also a dish made with truffles, a sort of mushroom that grows underground and is found with difficulty by watching where the wild boars root. It was a delicate and rare food then, as it is now. And just a little side note here, if you read some of the other biographies, it will tell you that he died from eating tainted pork. Actually, I found one source which calls it Sukara Madhava, which means pig's soft food. So sometimes that would be interpreted as the actual pork, or perhaps the truffles, the soft food that the pigs eat. We're not sure. Buddha knew at once that there was something wrong with the truffle dish, and he said to Chunda, "Serve me the truffles. Give rice and cake to the other monks." He had always taught that a monk must eat what is put before him, neither liking nor disliking. And also he had already taken his leave of life. When he had finished the meal, he told Chunda, "Whatever truffles you have left, bury them in a hole. Do not feed them to anyone else." Chunda obeyed, and then Buddha gave him thanks for his hospitality with a discourse, a sermon. By the time he ended his talk, terrible pains had seized him, but he gave no sign of them. He said to Ananda, his attendant, "Let us go to Kusinara." And then there's a long narrative about their journey to Kusinara, which was very painful and difficult for the Buddha, and he was becoming rapidly more and more ill. And also a lot of back and forth between the Buddha and the monks with his last teachings. Also a constant stream of people arriving to pay him homage as the word kind of got out in the countryside that he was about to pass away. Presently he regained strength, and they went on. They arrived at the Sala Grove. A bench had been built between two sala trees, on which Ananda the attendant spread a folded robe for the Buddha, and now at last he lay down on his right side with one leg resting on top of the other. The sala trees were blooming out of season, swaying in the breeze, and some blossoms fell on him. He was very weak now. He called Ananda close to him, and he said, "It may be, Ananda, that some of you might think the word of the Master is ended. We have no teacher anymore. But this is not so, Ananda. The Dharma is there. This is your teacher." He called his monks close to him. They came and sat in silent groups, their yellow robes turning silver under the full moon. "Brethren," said the Buddha, "think well. If there is any doubt or misgiving in your mind about the teaching, any one of you, inquire freely." Last chance. They were silent. And the Buddha said, "Brethren, everything that has a beginning must have an end. Work out your salvation with diligence." He put his head on his arm, lying quietly on his right side with one foot on the other. And then he passed into trance, and presently his light went out. The monks huddled like nesting birds in the rain. So these are the three events commemorated on Vesak. And the question is, how exactly do we celebrate them? So Buddhists, as you might guess, are not big on raucous celebrations. We're more prone to quiet reflection and meditation. In Buddhist countries, Vesak is very definitely a religious holiday, not a secular one. Devotees will wear white, all white, and visit the temple, bringing offerings of flowers and candles, incense, perhaps decorated lanterns. And they'll spend all day and sometimes all night at the temple, the whole family, and the monks will be chanting and times of silent meditation. In some ways it's very solemn, but also I think there's a sense of deep joy underneath it, calm joy, and also gratitude for the Buddha's teachings. So this morning here at UUFC, we've had a little taste of some of the ways that Buddhists observe Vesak. We've had moments of silent meditation and chanting of sacred words, reading of the sutras, which are from the Buddha's sermons and teachings. And also we've had the very enjoyable ritual of bathing the Buddha, which is done on Vesak in temples all over the Buddhist world. Usually it's done with a little baby Buddha in the center. We couldn't find one. We didn't actually have one. But the little baby Buddha is raising one hand to heaven and one hand to the earth. And as Terry said, when we bathe the Buddha, we're recreating that lovely image of the gentle rain coming from the heavens to bless the Buddha, the baby. So these are some of the outward, external forms that we celebrate Vesak with. But I just want to, in closing, kind of briefly consider the question of what is the greater significance of this holiday? Not just for Buddhists, and not even those of us who are Buddhist-friendly, but anyone who's curious. What are we actually celebrating when we celebrate Vesak? I'd like to read the words to answer that question. These are from Jack Kornfield, a wonderful modern American Buddhist teacher who many of you know and appreciate. And this is what Jack Kornfield has to say about this whole story of the Buddha. This is one of the most beloved stories of the human race, told and retold over the centuries. It's beloved because it reminds us of the possibility of freedom, of awakening the heart. It is repeated because it is our story. Together with the Buddha, each of us can remember our own ignorance and struggles, and each of us can sense the path that we too might follow to live a life of freedom in thought and word and deed. Thank you.
I'm going to read a verse uttered by the newly enlightened Buddha. This is considered his first words upon realizing enlightenment. So it's a verse uttered in great joy, having accomplished what he has set out to do many lifetimes prior to this. Okay, and they are called udana in Buddhism. Although the greater language at the time in India was Sanskrit, at least in this part of India where he was born, the language that was used was Pali. So it was in Pali that Buddha spoke and delivered his sermons. So I'm going to recite this verse, the very famous verse of victory or udana in Pali first, and then I'll give you the English translation. Okay. Anek jati sansarang sandha visang anibisam gahakarakang gave santo dukkha jati punapuna gahakaraka dittosi punagehan nakahasi sabbe te pasukha bagga gahakutang visankitam visankarang gatang chittam tanhakayang kayamajjaga. So that was the Pali version. Now the English translation goes like this. Through the countless births in cycle of existence, I have traveled in vain, seeking the builder of this house. And again I failed to find the builder of this house. and face the suffering of new birth. And the second verse goes like this. O house builder, now I have seen you. You shall not build a house again for me. All your beams are broken. The ridgepole is shattered. The mind has become freed from all the conditioning of the past and has no more craving for the future. So that's the English translation. In this verse, the house, the term house is interpreted as our mind and body, okay? More specifically known in Buddhism as 5 aggregates. It's the vehicle from which we operate in this world, our mind and the body. The house builder that the Buddha discovered was none other than ignorance, which is called avijja in Pali. He discovered the ignorance is arising due to craving and attachment. Craving is called tanha, and attachment is called upadana. Craving and attachment provide the impetus for subsequent becoming or birth, known as bhava. Because he has eradicated all craving and attachments, he is now called the supremely enlightened one, the Buddha. So this is the famous victory verse uttered by the Buddha upon realization of enlightenment, about now getting close to 2,600 years in India, under a Bodhi tree in the full moon day of May, in the month of May. Thank you.
Everyone. I'm going to ask you now to join me in metta practice. Metta practice is an exercise in learning compassion, first for ourselves, then reaching out to the universe. On Tuesday evenings, our Sangha concludes with this practice every Tuesday night. So, if you would close your eyes, sit comfortably in your chairs. Relax your face, release your shoulders. Then repeat silently after me these words. First for yourself, because there is no one more deserving of your compassion than you are. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be free from fear. Then bring to your mind someone or someones whom you love, those you cherish, those for whom you want only good things to happen, and say these words to them. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be free from fear. Then, because compassion must extend beyond those we cherish, to those that we fear or distrust, to those who would do harm, to those who we might first consider unlovable, because these beings are also in need of compassion, think of someone or someones with whom you have conflict. And to that one or those beings, repeat these words. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be free from fear. And then finally, moving beyond this room, out into our community, our state, our country, the world, and to the far reaches of the universe, to all beings, those known and unknown, those born and to be born. Repeat these words. May all beings be filled with loving kindness. May all beings be well. May all beings be peaceful and at ease. May all beings be free from fear.